Now to South Africa, where thousands of migrants continue to leave following threats from anti-immigrant groups. At the border to Zimbabwe, authorities have set up camps to process the papers of people leaving the country. Protesters from the March and March movement set an arbitrary deadline of June 30th for undocumented foreigners to leave the country, and they've conducted door-to-door campaigns warning foreign residents and shop owners.
It's 7 a.m. at the Musina repatriation center, a temporary camp South African authorities set up close to the border to Zimbabwe. People have their bags packed and their children bundled up. They hope they don't have to spend another cold and uncomfortable night here. Miriam Langa lived in South Africa for 9 years. Cleaning houses, she made enough money to feed herself and one of her children, while the rest of her family stayed in Malawi. Yet she no longer feels safe in South Africa.
There I was staying, it's not all right. People were talking too much, they are fighting, and they were telling us that we are going to fight you until you leave here. And even your houses, we are going to break your houses until you leave here. So to say the truth, we were in fear.
The threat of xenophobic attacks hangs over everyone here. Anti-immigrant groups have called for undocumented foreign nationals to leave. Foreigners have been harassed, and self-styled vigilante groups have carried out door-to-door campaigns to push people out. South African authorities say they repatriated over 50,000 foreign nationals in the past month, 30,000 through this border alone. As new buses arrive here every day, aid groups provide the basic needs.
The camp can host about 30,000 people. Last week we had about 22,000 on the camp. And then the team has been on the ground since day one. We've been pushing, serving hot meals, giving baby diapers, baby formulas, some blankets, because you understand that there's change, and then other people, they need blankets to sleep on, especially kids and mothers.
Authorities say most people in this camp do not have a legal immigration status or are undocumented. This is why officials are now verifying their identities and issuing travel documents for the journey ahead. Not everyone is willing to speak on camera, but many people tell us they've lived in South Africa for years. Some were even born here.
All the people here have been waiting here with all their belongings for the buses to take them across the border to Zimbabwe and then on to their home areas. They've had their papers processed, but now they're waiting for the transport to take them back home.
While South Africa has had outbursts of xenophobic violence in the past, the number of people leaving is unprecedented. Immigration authorities have a lot to catch up on.
The numbers themselves have reflected that we've got quite a lot of people that do not really respect the immigration laws of our country. It also teaches us that there are some other things that we also have to strengthen. We have to make sure that we strengthen our border processes. We have to ensure that there are systems we bring in new technology that can assist us also to be able to let you know that, you know what, you've been here, you've been allowed 30 days, you are now on day number 18 or on day number 90.
The Department of Home Affairs, however, warned South Africans not to take immigration matters into their own hands. For Miriam, the abrupt departure means an uncertain future. She has family in Malawi, but she doesn't know how to make ends meet.
There, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. I'm just going because it's my home.
Most of the people here still have 1 or 2 days ahead of them on the road. And as these buses leave, more people are expected to arrive at the border, as pressure on foreign nationals shows no sign of easing.
I spoke about this earlier with Jo Vearey, an associate professor and co-director at the African Center for Migration and Society at University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. I asked her what's behind this outpouring of anti-immigrant sentiment in South Africa.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a rise and a real normalization of xenophobic hate speech, of the blaming and scapegoating of foreign nationals, in particular undocumented foreign nationals, for failures in the South African state to deliver on its promises and to uphold access to basic services, address high unemployment rates, and so on. And we're seeing vigilante movements using the frustrations of South African citizens those, we have looking at 38% unemployment, for example, and using this language that foreign nationals are to blame. But with only about 4% of the South African population being foreign born, that clearly tells us that this isn't the case. And there's no evidence to suggest that foreign nationals are in any way to blame for these failures in the state to provide the services, the jobs, and so on.
Now, there's real urgency here. You mentioned vigilantism. Tell us more about what the government is doing to help those people who are threatened by vigilante violence right now.
Unfortunately, we're seeing very limited action by the state, and far too little being said, far too little being done to call out what these vigilante groups are doing, the misinformation that's being spread. And we're seeing tensions where, for example, the police may be involved or are not stepping in, when we're seeing citizens who are perhaps demanding documents from individuals, pulling people out of their homes or their places of work, forcing people to flee, looting shops, and threatening people's lives. We're seeing a really big challenge around the ways in which the law is not being upheld, not only in terms of, for example, the way in which foreign nationals should be treated under immigration law, under the Refugee Act, and under international agreements, but also in terms of how law and disorder are prevailing within the ways in which we're seeing this play out in South Africa. And whilst every so often we hear, whether it's the president or other public officials, reminding South African citizens of their responsibility to uphold the law, that's not preventing the vigilante activities that we're seeing. And it's certainly not ensuring that the police are being held to account for their failures to act when required.
What about those South Africans who complain that illegal migration is out of control and that it's placing an unacceptable strain on employment and public services, because that's the rhetoric that we're hearing from some of these vigilante groups? Do they have legitimate grievances?
I think that we have to be very, very careful. South Africa is the most unequal country globally, and there are very real challenges faced by the majority of the South African population in terms of access to employment, access to secure housing, access to basic services, including healthcare, access to quality education, and so on. And these challenges and these frustrations are real and they're legitimate. But the scapegoating of foreign nationals has no place here. It essentially is enabling the state to be left off the hook when it comes to where they're failing to deliver. It enables a political movement, essentially, to take advantage of the South African population who are currently experiencing these challenges, and suggesting that if we were to remove all foreign nationals, particularly undocumented migrants, from the country, somehow that would be addressing, for example, a nearly 40% unemployment rate. And that's just not the case. South Africa, like every nation, has the right and responsibility to manage its borders. We have an Immigration Act, we have a Refugee Act, and those legal provisions should be being followed, and nobody's disputing that. The challenge at the moment is the ways in which this language of the foreigner is being used to drive further hatred and to distract blame and detract responsibility from government for their failures.
So you're suggesting that this is really a massive failure of governance and that it's being exploited by certain parties for their own benefit. But from the government's perspective, what does this exodus mean for the country's economy and its relations with other countries in the region?
Yeah, I mean, it is having an impact not only on diplomatic relationships between South Africa and other countries. For example, I think it was last week we saw the Ghanaian president delay sort of indefinitely a meeting with President Ramaphosa. We are hearing sort of talk of whether South African businesses in other African countries or licenses to continue operating South African-owned mines, for example, are those going to be renewed? We know that the removal and the forced displacement of foreign nationals in South Africa impacts the economy both within South Africa, but also in countries of origin. And we have to recognize this, therefore, is a much bigger development issue for all of the Southern African region. by disrupting people's livelihoods, by disrupting their ability to send remittances home. You're disrupting those financial security nets in sending country communities, in households, and at national levels. In South Africa, we're disrupting important economies, for example, cross-border trade, for example, textile industries, the purchasing of textiles in a city like Johannesburg that are then taken back to other African countries and sold. These are multi-million rand economies of scale. And by disrupting those, you are obviously going to have a downstream consequence. Foreign nationals in the country, like everybody else, are contributing to the national fiscus. They're contributing taxes through purchases of anything, also through formal tax systems associated with paid employment.
Sure.
We're seeing disruptions in farming areas, in agricultural farms, with foreign workers potentially being dismissed by owners, and these kinds of challenges that are disrupting numerous economic sectors.
A story with huge implications. Jo, thanks for taking time to speak with us today. That was Jo Vearey from South Africa's University of the Witwatersrand.